So I was really in some deep meditation, and it wasn't orbs that came into my home, it was more beings. And it was a really startling experience for me, because I know I was in meditation and I could hear her growling, really growling. And I remember, what's happening? And I opened my eyes and there was beings around me, and I couldn't move, but I wasn't scared. I was just more like, this is a bit trippy. What's happening here? It was the very fact that she was growling that kept me grounded in this reality, that I wasn't dreaming, I wasn't, I hadn't had an aneurysm, or, something weird had happened. I was in my home. I'd lost a lot of time, but it was her growling that kept me thinking, okay, I am at home, the dog's next to me, she's growling, there's something here. And there was beings around me, and I was left with communicative words in my head. And I think if it hadn't been for her growling and freaking out the way she just did then, I would have maybe thought it was a dream.
Welcome. I'm here with Hollywood. Hollywood, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. So let's just go all the way to the beginning. Tell the audience about yourself, just a little bit of background, bio background, and then how you became an experiencer.
So, first and foremost, my name is Hollywood, and it is a real name because people quite often ask me, was it intentional? Didn't marry into it. I was born Hollywood.
And by the way, we did not schedule this after the fires in Los Angeles. So I think literally right now, or as of last night, Hollywood, Brentwood, like all those at Bel Air, are all being threatened with fire. So that's a pretty dark, but it's a dark synchronicity. So anyway,
yes. Prayers, and my heart goes out to everyone that's affected. I've got friends of mine that live in Los Angeles, and I'm constantly checking, make sure they're safe and they've been evacuated. And it is horrific what's happened, and we pray everyone can recover and rebuild for sure. So my story, I am a public relations, marketing, sort of comms professional. That's what I've been for the majority of my life. I've had the pleasure of working all over the world. But my story begins as a young girl, really. I was brought up in a very occult, very pagan, witchy, crackers sort of household. My mum was a very well-known and celebrated mystic here in the UK. So I had a very strange, paranormal, weird, interesting childhood.
You're taking us right down an alley right now. So what was her name?
We are. Her name was Jeanette. I won't disclose her second name. She's no longer with us, but she was out there. I mean, really. And I didn't know that everyone didn't live like us until I went to high school. I thought everyone took their summer holidays to Stonehenge and to Avebury Circle, and everyone celebrated the pagan calendar. And so, and Halloween was the biggest night of our year. I just thought that's how everyone lived. Turns out they don't. So I spent my childhood learning how to read tarot cards and read rune stones and Dow's ley lines. And I spent time with druids and witches and all kinds of esoteric occult folks. That was my life. And my first kind of interaction, shall we say, with the phenomenon was my mother was performing a magical rite with a coven down in Wiltshire, which is a huge hotspot for UAP activity. It's where the crop circles are, it's where Stonehenge is. And she was performing a magical rite, because that's normal, on the side of an ancient chalk horse carved into the chalk hills at the Wiltshire, the Salisbury Plain. And I was sat in the eye of a horse with the chalk horse with a couple of other children, with a can of soda and a bag of chips, just sort of waiting for our parents to stop being a bit weird. and orange orb appeared to us. But because our parents were doing magical stuff, because everyone's parents were magical, I didn't know any different. It wasn't a stretch that this orange, I called it a mini sun. This mini sun appeared. So I just thought it was part of whatever was going on.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Baen Books at baen.com.
It was no different. It was just pretty normal. Fast forward.
Was this day or night? Day or night?
Daytime.
Okay.
Daytime. I was about 8 or 9, I think. I was taken out of school quite a lot as a child because we would go and live with New Age travelers, or we would go and live with Saturn mystics in the woods at times. We just lived off grid from time to time. So I was quite young, and she communioned with the other side. So table tip and ghosts. So a lot of paranormal stuff was
What's table tip?
So when you're like doing Ouija boards and you're talking to spirits and they move tables and things like that, that was a regular Saturday night activity.
Like seances and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay. Very regular. She would often be called upon to go and ghost hunt and diminish a ghost or a haunting from people's homes. She was called on to do that all the time, and I'd go along.
Now, you're familiar with the skull experiment?
I am, yes.
Okay. All right. I talk about that all the time, so I'm not going to go into it. So, like this stuff.
That's kind of my background.
Like, I want to be very clear. Like, this stuff is real, right?
Very real.
Have you ever spoken to Steve Mera?
Steve Mera is a friend of mine. I actually host some of this conference. I've hosted this conference here in the UK. And I'm actually going to talk about it. I think I've just booked something that he's involved with for this year. It's Steve. Steve, yeah, great guy. Love his wife.
Love Steve. Love Steve.
Love him and Barry. Him and Barry Fitzgerald are like my favourite people. I've just had a book off Barry actually that was all a bit spooky and about Faye. But yes, love Steve. Yeah, he's a good guy. But that was kind of like my childhood. I didn't really know anything about UFOs or aliens or ETs. Really, that just wasn't in our sort of peripheral or our day-to-day life. I was quite gifted as a kid. Even though I didn't go to school very often, when I was in schools, I was often skipped years and classes and things like that. And due to that giftedness, not my words, by the way, it was recommended that I got a computer and the internet. And we're talking, way back sort of early 90s type thing. So my mum conceded to stay home instead of running off to the hills. We stayed in one place for some time, and she brought me the internet. And my quest and thirst for knowledge, I stumbled across something about, I think, Roswell and then Area 51 and all of those things that you kind of fall into. And I remember reading something about an orb, and it described the orbs, the orange suns that I'd seen throughout my life. And I'd seen them lots of times. They would appear quite frequently in the house, outside the house, when we were traveling. And they were just part of my life. So then I was like, well, what is this? And just immersed myself in every book and chat room and anything that I could find on the internet. And then I started to really get into the topic because I was able to connect these orange suns with what I was reading. And then, fast forward into my sort of late teens, still having interaction with those type orbs, still quite involved in the paranormal community, that's how I was brought up. So it was, the same as most things that carry on into your life. And then into my 20s, again, just was quite obsessed with the phenomena and, reading and discovering like John Mark and just, discovering all of these different folks, Jacques Vallée, da. And then when it really became part of my life, which brings me probably to why we're here, is before, just as England went into lockdown, I'm really into meditation, really into consciousness, really into the study of what consciousness is. And I watched Greer. It was on Amazon. I watched a Greer film, Dr. Greer thing, and it kind of sandwiched the others and consciousness together. And I'd not really come across that in my research much. It had been nuts and bolts or other. So that really intrigued me. Downloaded the app, as you do, paid $20, whatever it was for. And it had like, there's people in your area. I was like,
CE5.
The CE5 app. I was like, there's more people like me here. I live in the north of England. I didn't really know that many people that were into this topic. It's very fringe. Went on the app. Surprisingly, there wasn't anybody really. So I was like, damn. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to look on Facebook. Had a little look on Facebook and found a thriving community of C5 type people. And I was like, oh my gosh, I found my people. And then we hit lockdown in the UK. So I wasn't at work. I was able to spend more time studying, talking to these people. And then somehow I ended up becoming the lead for C5 UK and looked after the North as a region. Don't quite know how that really happened. And it just did. And as a result of that, I just kind of ended up in the C5 community for some time, had some media interest around that. And then somehow just became more and more known, certainly in the UK.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
I stepped away from some of the C5 stuff. I'm not the greatest advocate of some of Greer's stuff, but I discovered Dr. Joseph Bex, and he is an advocate of HICE, which is human-initiated contact events. And that was more kind of my vibe than C5. I don't believe...
I know Dr. Birx, too. Yeah, I've interviewed him.
He's just lovely. Yeah, he's just lovely. I was introduced to Dr. Joe and Ray Hernandez, and that was a couple of years ago. Had some media interest, started leading expeditions out into the field to make contact, had some really successful contact experiences, adjacent to me still having the interface with these orange orbs and stuff. And then again, somehow find myself, I now host conversations with a lot of thought leaders and researchers and journalists. I have the privilege and the absolute privilege of being part of, UFO Twitter Week. I create spaces and have, guests on from Ross Coulthard to James Fox to Matt Pine, Steve Mira. And for some reason, people like to talk to me and I like to talk to them, and we like to delve, discuss and get into what the phenomena is. So I don't quite know how I'm here, but I'm here. And it's, I have the privilege of, working with and supporting experiences as well, because I think there's a real need to advocate for experiences and having our experiences taken seriously. And I'm really hot and on the reduction of the stigma as well. There's, thousands of experiences out there that there's no care and support for them. And that's one of my big things. And I'm really blessed that I'm able to work with a phenomenal foundation here in the UK called Unhidden. And they're really doing some big things. So yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell. I talk a lot. I'm an experiencer. I'm a publicist by trade. I'm a mum. And I just like to create conversations around the phenomena and really believe that, together we can unravel some of these mysteries. Ta-da!
So many questions. Okay.
So many.
So going back to the orange orbs, I've never really gone down this rabbit hole, but there's a reason for it that I'm asking some of these questions. I just want to... Have you ever seen one of these things at night?
Yes.
How bright are they at night? Like, just like slightly luminous that they don't light up the sky, or just sometimes they just so bright
they don't. The sky? My experience, they have like an iridescent glow that's not crazily illumination, if that makes sense. So they create light, but they're not filled with a huge amount of lumens that, they're like an actual sun or anything. But it's really hard to explain. They're filled with light, but they're not giving off huge light. If that makes any sense. And there's been no difference in the ones I've seen in daytime, the ones I've seen in my home, the ones I've seen outside of places. They've all had the same light signature, if that's the right phrase.
Okay. And then in your research with them, what did you find about them that caused you to go down that rabbit hole?
To dial it back a little bit, I didn't realize at that young age. So my dog's about to explode that way. As a young girl, I didn't know that these were not something everyone saw. So to come to a place as a young teenager and figure out that this wasn't part of everybody's everyday, that was more of the mind bend than the actual objects themselves. And when I came across, articles, conversations around them, I was more bewildered by the fact that this wasn't an everyday occurrence for people. Not that they were happening every day to me, but they happened with regularity that I didn't understand at first why people were like so shocked or intrigued or so curious as to what they are. For me, they've always been very personal. And I was talking about this recently. These orbs have only ever come to me during real heightened times of emotion or transitional periods in my life. How do they know? What intelligence is behind that to know that I'm emotive? What intelligence is behind them or whatever they are to know that I'm in a transitional period in my life? That is the question for me a little bit more. And that's the question I'm searching for. I'm searching for answers on that every single day, and I'm yet to find those answers. But there's an intelligence to them in my experience.
And aside from just seeing them and having them appear during transitional moments of your life, is there anything more to that interaction that you care to talk about?
Yeah, I've had some physical and health symptoms when they've been around. So when I was a kid, they would come around and I would complain after they'd sort of left that I would have really bad tummy aches. I was very dehydrated. I was constantly taken to doctors with this tummy challenge, and they never could understand what it was. And that's continued when I've had interaction with them. I have physical symptoms that are unexplained, which that's always been a strange one. And I'm yet to really read any further information about that in any research. Haven't yet come across things where people talk about interaction with these orbs and they have these, tummy, gut, GI, gastro, whatever issues that I have had and continue to have with them. That's a bit of a strange one for me.
Is it like nausea, things like that, or is it just other kind of gastrointestinal?
I feel very ill. It's normally a day or two after. It's not immediate. My tummy swells. I just become quite sick. As a child, I called it hot belly. That was the only way I could describe it to an adult. I've got hot belly and enormous amounts of tests later. No one knew what that was. But it only ever happened with an incursion or interaction with those orbs, or orange suns, as I refer to them.
Any, like, sunburn or anything like that? Like skin? Okay. There's a lot of
stuff.
With different or colored orbs, right? Particularly blue orbs. There's been a lot of the symptoms that people have been reported to have experienced are very similar or akin to radiation sickness. What you're describing sort of kind of fits there, but not entirely. That's why I'm asking about sunburn and like, right, with Travis Walton, he kind of had like sunburn and or similar effects to that. But feeling sick, having nausea, very similar to radiation sickness, or a kind of a type of radiation sickness. So,
yeah, I wish, I wished there was an adult who perhaps had more knowledge as a child that could have tracked some of these symptoms. But, imagine taking a child to a physician saying, hey, my kid's seeing these orange things floating around the house, and her belly, her stomach is really sore, and she's struggling with X, Y, and Z, and she's hot and she's thrown up. They would have just like gone, what? Is this child insane or something? So unfortunately, there was never a correlation of she's seen these things and this is her physical symptoms. And, hindsight's a great thing. And I've had those symptoms as an adult as well. So now I have to be, it was one of the reasons why I stopped doing C5 or HICE, because the interactions were making me sometimes a little bit sick. And I was able to correlate that. And that's why I took a year out from doing anything. I've not done any C5 or HICE for over 12 months now, and I've not had any of those symptoms.
Now, have these, I don't even know to call them entities, but have these orbs communicated with you in any way, either implicit or explicit?
Those orbs haven't. The only time when I felt as an adult that there was an interaction that was really poignant, I had an accident 3 years ago. I'm really clumsy, really, really clumsy. I'm on the spectrum, and that's part of that. And I think that's probably why they call me gifted as well. I am on the spectrum. I'm autistic. I've got ADHD and a whole plethora of other acronyms. Anyway, I'm very clumsy. I fell off a flip-flop shoe at our family farm and somehow had a freak accident, broke my fibula, tibia, and ankle in numerous places. Had to be taken to a high dependent unit and had a 6.5-hour surgery that resulted in an external frame being put on my leg to try and save my leg bone so I would walk again. And it was really, really awful. A really, really terrible time. It hit me very hard mentally. I was nearly 2 hours away from my family on this high dependent hospital, nowhere near home. And it really damaged me mentally. I didn't know if I'd walk again. I was on a lot of morphine. I was on a lot of drugs. It was very painful. And I'd hit a real low point. And I just didn't want to be here anymore. I was a mum. I drive. What was I going to do? And I was just mentally very not well at that point. And I asked one of the nurses one day, and this was during lockdown, so I had my own room, or towards the end of lockdown. And I just said, I just want to just look out. I just want to see outside. I hadn't been outside for, 7-8 weeks. Just want to see the stars. I had this really strange feeling that I should be looking outside. And they were like, yeah, sure. Wheeled my bed to the window. And I just kind of knew that I would see them. And, orange orbs, bing, bing, bing. They appeared outside the room of the hospital. And I was like, it was like, and this sounds really bananas, it was like they knew that I needed to see them. Because when those orbs have appeared in my life in a transitional period, I've been able to move on to the next part, or it's become better, and that I associated those orbs perhaps psychologically with change, or newness was coming, or it was going to be okay. And the fact that those orbs appearing to me outside the hospital window in a rural setting, they appeared changed the course of where I was at. And I knew from that moment that we were on the right track to healing and getting better. And I did. And I always think back to that now, like, were they telling me something? Is it a communication that I don't understand? But I knew at that moment, upon seeing them, we're going to be okay, Holly. We dug ourselves out of that hole I was in mentally. And, I was home within 3 weeks. I was, had a miraculous recovery. I recovered really quickly. Surgeons were quite surprised as to my recovery rate. My bones fused really quickly. I was able to go to the gym in that leg frame, and I had the leg frame removed a lot earlier than they believed. And I've regained full function of my leg, which wasn't supposed to happen. Cue spooky music. So yeah, I think that was, I can't call that communication, but I felt there was purpose.
And also associated with all this stuff growing up, any instances of precognition, telepathic communication with other people, sort of some of the stuff that's associated with interacting with the phenomenon, I guess is a way to put this.
So, yeah, an answer to your question, yes. Having been brought up by a very mystical mum, we would do telepathy tests, what are we thinking? What's this card? And that was just part of my childhood. So we would call it the knowing. So we'd always have a sense of knowing. And, my intuition game is pretty strong. It freaks my partner out, freaks my kid out. It's something that I've always had an extra sense of knowing. So yes, but having a parent like I had is because we did, what is this card, or what am I thinking? She was a big believer in dream time, giving us messages. Everything had a meaning esoterically. And so, is it nature nurture? Was I trained in something, or is it something I inherently have as a result of my interaction with other? I don't know. What's interesting is I have a child. He thinks I'm the most biggest embarrassment he's ever met. He's so anti any of this stuff. I've just caught him watching X-Files actually, so maybe we're getting in a little bit. I've never put any of this stuff on him. I've never tested him. I've never, what are we thinking? What are these cards? And interestingly, he has what I would call a sense of knowing. So, I don't know.
What about...
Can you imagine my house on Halloween?
It sounds like fun, actually. It sounds like it would be a blast.
Well, yeah, we do have some fun. But sorry, go on.
What about communication with animals, things like that? Or just, I shouldn't say communication, but strange interactions with animals that don't quite make sense otherwise. But again, you're going to remind me that you grew up where a lot of this.
I grew up like that. We had a billion
when you were growing up with this kind of animal stuff. Yeah.
Interestingly, my dog's just been really ill, really sick, and my family always, mum knows if there's something wrong with the animals. I think because I'm autistic as well, I struggle with big crowds of people, quite a solitude person, and I do prefer animals to humans. We go to our family farm and I would rather just be with the dogs and animals. But I've always been like that, I know, and I don't know, because this is just who I am. But yeah, I've always had animals, and really small babies are my thing.
Yeah, I'm not so much small babies. I kind of would avoid them like the plague. But I'm similar in the sense with, animals versus I'd rather spend time around animals kind of in solitude than...
They're the best.
Yeah, ever since I started following or covering this topic, not necessarily, I've always been passively following it for a very long time, but, ever since I started this podcast, things have gotten weird with animals, right? Like, and I'll be very quick because this interview's about you, not me. But you ever have like an owl kind of just land on your back fence and just allow you to approach it and take, I don't know, I have 1,000 photos of this owl, a great horned owl.
That's incredible.
Like it didn't seem normal, but maybe it is. I don't know.
Owls are associated with the phenomena in if you look at sort of pagan and Wiccan views of the intelligent creatures that are owls, they come bearing message, right? Our family farm in North Wales, there's an owl and his wife, that one sits that side and they twit and they true to each other. And they are mystical, magical beings. And I always say this to people: when you start interacting in some level with the phenomena, whether that be, you're knee deep in research and you've got books up to here, you've got a podcast and you're researching for that, you're active. When you actively do something within this arena, somehow it interacts with you back. And I will die on a hill on that, because as soon as you're in it, it's sort of kind of like, and I've talked about this with Steve Merrill actually, like when you're in it and you're doing something, I think a lever or a signal or something happens and it interacts with you back. And I think that's part of it. And when people really think that the woo and the nuts and bolts are not together,
they're the same. They're the same.
It's so,
if you spend 2 weeks, if you spend 2 weeks on this in your initial research, if you don't, maybe I'm not being fair, but like to me in the first 2 weeks, it was obvious that there was a connection. Like it's obvious.
And one doesn't exist without the other. And my mum was very pagan and occult and out there, but I come from an Irish family, very Catholic, militantly Catholic. Priest would be round on a Sunday. We went to church, or my nin would get crack around the back of your head. Very Catholic, but she still would leave silver out for the fae. If there was a new baby born in our family, she would leave silver out, and she's like, "They're not getting my babies." I'd be like, "You're really Catholic. Where's this from?" And she knew that you had to appease other, because that's just what you have to do. And I just find it really interesting that as much as people can deny the phenomena and they can say it's not out there, it's kind of weaved into so many places, and it does go hand in hand. And I really think it's great this moment in time how a lot of the nuts and bolts folk are really starting to like shimmy into some of the woo-woo, as people call it, because one doesn't exist without the other at all.
Well, there might be scientific underpinnings under all this, just science we don't quite understand, or it could be science that we sort of understand, but not fully, like a quantum mechanical universe, Hugh Everett's many worlds theory, things like that. But you're touching on a lot of not weird, because I mean that in a very positive way. Because weird actually,
do you know what the word
like
weird?
Wisdom.
Go on.
Yeah.
Well, like weird comes from and fate. Weird comes from the Old English word wyrd, and that comes the base word it could be linked to fate. So is what's weird could be meant, could be fate, could be synchronistic.
So like you, I'm
so weird. I know.
No, but like you, I'm half. Oh, I'm not. I shouldn't say like you. I'm half Irish, but I'm half Irish, and there's a lot of that stuff that just kind of bubbles. It's almost like a genetic memory in some sense. I mean, that sounds crazy, but
it's not crazy.
And then on my kind of grandfather's side, like you look up my name, Hazlett, right? If you look at the coat of arms, you mentioned, well, you know what Hazlett means, right? It just means someone who lives near a hazel copse. And I mean, you probably know far more about hazel staves and stuff like that than
hazel's a magical thing to work with as well in some traditions. So, it's all got its base in like. But here's one, a mind bend for you. so many of us with Celtic blood or experiences. A lot of us are on the spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
We have a sense of knowing, precognition. We have a little something going on. And a lot of us have Celtic blood. Ooh. And I speak to so many people who come from Irish descent. And it's like,
yeah,
there's something here.
Yeah, there's something there, maybe. Or maybe we're just proud to be Irish. I don't know.
My ancestors will be blessing me all night.
Yeah, so, and then even with the coat of arms, right? You talked about silver. There's silver and blue. I don't know if blue means anything, but there's silver and blue on the coat of arms. There's also a black dog, which I'm sure there's some imagery about that. But anyway, like a black hound.
Wow.
Anything?
You're going to get like so many emails off me later, like, did you know this? And did you know that? And that's what happens when you're autistic. You give me a subject and you'll have like a dissertation by the end of the week. So apologies. But that's crazy.
No, you don't have to apologize. The more I get into these rabbit holes, the stranger it gets, right? Then you start to have dreams, like a black dog in your dream, like just weird stuff like that.
It's a message.
My issue is I'm so ignorant on the pagan stuff, but again, we're supposedly talking UAPs, UFOs. It takes you down these seemingly completely unrelated rabbit holes, but I don't think they're unrelated. I think there's some, when you're talking about, we talked about before, kind of some theories, or before we recorded anything, about some theories about what this could be. And one that's out there, and I don't mean out there by strange, I mean just like it's out in the zeitgeist, cultural zeitgeist, is that these entities that people are interacting with, orbs or whatever you want to call it, are not necessarily from, off planet, but are here coexisting with us, maybe out of phase in kind of another dimensional space, etc. And kind of the Fae, that whole realm is completely consistent with some of the things that experiencers mention. And it's not to say that they're, fairies in the background and this and that, but just that tradition is just that was the language used to describe these entities and beings. And there's just a huge, I think Joshua Cutchin kind of did a lot of work on kind of looking at the similarities between alien abductions, which we won't talk about, and kind of the Fae and the changelings and that phenomenon, and things like that. And there's just a lot of weird similarities, and then just take it off on an entirely other random thread.
It really does. Like, I go down to Wiltshire every summer, end of summer, when it's crop circle season, and you meet every slice of human you can possibly meet in that environment. And some are there because they believe these crop circles are made by ETs. Some are there because they believe it to be a phenomena of the earth. Some are there because they see these orbs flying around, creating them. Some are there because they're actually making them. Newsflash. And, wherever I turn throughout my journey, and I'm probably a bit more esoteric in the way I do things because of my upbringing, I can always find a thread that weaves in the UAP stuff, to the esoteric stuff, to the occulty stuff, to the Gnostic stuff, to, the orders of this, that, and the other, the Masonic orders, the Order of the Golden Dawn, all of these mystery schools. We start looking at the Rosicrucians. I've spent a lot of time studying Rosicrucianism. Jacques Vallée is, by self-admission, him and Dr. Haneke they taught themselves they didn't hang out in Rosicrucian as a group, but they took the learnings and teachings and put them into their practices. In Diana Pasulka's book Encounters, she talks about Jacques showing his library and talking about angels and fallen angels. The thread. Angels were often seen as fae in some, or elementals in some people's descriptions. So everything connects, and that to me is just like I went on a proper rant there, didn't I? But it's so clear to me that there's a thread that links this whole phenomenon together. And think of we could spend days going down rabbit holes, and that's the beauty of our community. Sometimes you always find someone who has another take and a different set of research, and how marvelous is that?
It's definitely marvelous and wonderful and crazy all at the same time. I think my view on kind of approaching this entire topic is it's like Schrodinger's belief system. You have to believe and disbelieve all at once at the same time, so that you don't. There's a mystic text in the Judaic tradition. I think it's called the Zohar. And it's one of those texts that, there are asylums in Israel filled with people who took it on too early. Apparently you're supposed to take it on. Again, it's very male-centric, right? But you're supposed to, the patriarch, once he has established a family and studied all his life, the Talmud and, all the other kind of Judaic texts, is only then, after he has children and kind of established a life, to go and study the Zohar, or attempt to study the Zohar. And
keywords.
And it's one of those things that, just like this topic, you have to keep one foot firmly grounded in our terrestrial space, I guess you could call it, in our reality. Otherwise, you can go bonkers, right? Just by following all these threads, because it's so fascinating. And, this stuff is real, but you also at the same time have to say, okay, step back. Did what just happen? Is that confirmation bias? Is that attention bias? Is it, like I talked to you about the owls, right? Ever since I started following this topic, I hear them all the time. I see them all the time. Now, is that because I'm looking for them? Yeah, part of it, probably. But how much of that is just due to attention bias, and how much of that is due to there's something really going on? So you have to constantly ask yourself those questions, not to be a skeptic, but just to keep yourself grounded so you don't go crazy, right?
My dog's really picking off. Give me a sec. I think she just wants to be included in the show.
That's okay.
Yeah. Silly guy.
Is this normal? Is this normal for him during podcasts? What's that?
She's just a bit strange.
Oh, it's she. So
when we start talking.
What's her name?
Her name's Tilly.
Tilly.
Yeah.
Tilly.
How
you doing, Tilly?
This is just what happens. I had an encounter in my home last 2 years ago, which was different from orbs. Stop. And I've been in some real meditation all day. And I've been doing a lot of stuff with the Monroe Institute at the time as well. So I was really in some deep meditation. And it wasn't orbs that came into my home. It was more beings. And it was a really startling experience for me, because I know I was in meditation and I could hear her growling, really growling. And I remember thinking, what's happening? And I opened my eyes and there was beings around me and I couldn't move, but I wasn't scared. I was just more like, this is a bit trippy. What's happening here? It was the very fact that she was growling that kept me grounded in this reality, that I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't, I hadn't had an aneurysm or, something weird had happened. I was in my home. I'd lost a lot of time, but it was her growling that kept me thinking, okay, I am at home. The dog's next to me. She's growling. There's something here. And there was beings around me. And I was left with communicative words in my head. And I think if it hadn't been for her growling and freaking out the way she just did then, I would have maybe thought it was a dream. So she's like my little biosensor.
Why do you think she was freaking out just then? Sorry, I'm making this very meta.
No, it's because I think she was aware that there was others in our environment. She doesn't like, because I'm quite solitude. I spend a lot of time with my dog. We're very linked, and she doesn't like others being around me too much because it's like me and her. Like, she's great with my family and stuff, but I'm her person and she's my person. And the incursion of these other in our safe space, in my bedroom, the sanctity, the middle of my home, she didn't like. So that's why I knew it wasn't like a dream or I was tripping or something strange was happening or I'd lost my mind temporarily. I was hallucinating. The fact that she flipped so viscerally and loudly. And these beings didn't really react to her freaking out. So I was aware she was freaking out. I'm thinking, should I freak out? What the heck are these things? Like these, the only way to describe it is like, they were like triangly bluish, strange beings. And I just always revert back. If she hadn't have booted off and been loud and growling, I may have just thought my brain had been a bit overactive. Maybe I'd been meditating and I'd just gone into my imagination, but I hadn't. There was a certain incursion in our home.
What I was really asking is, why do you think she just popped off now? Not in that experience, but now in this interview.
It happens when I start talking about these things. She gets like this. It's weird. I will not take her on any sort of expeditions or anything because she just flips. But yeah, maybe she's sensing something. Maybe because we're talking about a certain topic, it's putting it out into the wider sphere of, if I get taken tonight, Sean, it's all your fault.
It probably would be.
We shouldn't joke about things like that,
yeah,
but go on.
We went way overlong on this one. So, any final words for the audience?
I think keep looking up. I think we have so much to uncover and so many mysteries to unsolve. And that's the fun part, that we get to have front seats to the most incredible next step in humanity and whatever they are. We uncover it if we can.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Holly.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. We'll have to delve into another rabbit hole.
Oh my God, there's so many rabbit holes.
So many rabbit holes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and you can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of a expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's two options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site. And there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much and keep watching. I really appreciate it.